Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. Today is the 18th day of August 2024. I'm going to be reading chapter 3 of the book called Invisible Rainbow, Electricity and Life. This book is written by author Firstenberg, it's Firstenberg. I read the first two chapters earlier today, and I wanted to go ahead and read another part of this chapter as I share the research that he's done, which is a lot of research he's done. And mainly a lot of this stuff has basically been, it's there, but someone had to go out there and get it, so to say. And this guy did it. This book was was published in 2017, which now has been 7 years ago. It's also printed in the United States in 2020. The name of the chapter is called Electrical Sensitivity. I have almost entirely given up the electrical experiments. Quote, the author of these words, in referring to his own inability to tolerate electricity, wrote them not in the modern era of alternative currents and radio waves, but in the mid-18th century when all there was static electricity. French botanist Thomas Francois Dalbard, D-A-I-B-A-R-D, confided his reasons to Benjamin Franklin in a letter dated February 1762. Quote, first, the different electrical shocks have so strongly attacked my nervous system that I am left with convulsive tremor in my arms so that I can scarcely bring a glass to my mouth. And if I now were to touch one electrical spark, I would be unable to sign my name for 24 hours. So apparently he has a problem with tremors is what I'm guessing. Another thing that I notice is that it is almost impossible for me to seal a letter because the electricity of the Spanish wax communicating itself to my arm increases my tremor, end quote. Dalbart was not the only one. Benjamin Wilson, 1752 book, a treatise on electricity, helped promote the popularity of electricity in England, but he himself did not fare so well by it. Quote, upon repeating those shocks often for several weeks together, end quote, he wrote, quote, I at last was weakened so much that a very small quantity of electric matter in the vial would shock me to a great degree and cause an uncommon pain, so that I was obliged to desist from trying any more, end quote. Even rubbing a glass globe with his hand, that is the basic electrical machine of his day, gave him a, quote, a very violent headache, end quote. So, he'd been shocked so many times apparently, and so his sensitivity was now becoming very greater at this point. So in other words, anything that rubbing even a glass globe with his hand would be, almost shock, what we call static electricity, I should say, would cause him to have a headache. And so it kind of tells you that he's very sensitive. And this is what is happening at that point. People are no longer, the thrill is gone, so to speak. And it's, it's not worth it anymore, so to speak. The man who authored the first book in German devoted solely to electricity, that is, Null Antendach Phenomenon von der Kungen der Natur, that is, newly discovered phenomena of the wonderful workings of nature, in 1744, became gradually paralyzed on one side of his body, called the first electrical martyr, Johann Doppelmayr, D-O-P-P-E-L, Meyer, M-A-Y-E-R, professor of mathematics in Nuremberg, stubborn persisted in his researches and died of a stroke in 1750 after one of his electrical experiments. These were just three of the earliest casualties, three scientists who helped birth the electrical revolution in which they themselves could not participate. Even Franklin, that is Benjamin Franklin, developed a chronic neurological illness that began during the period of his electrical researches. and that recurred periodically for the rest of his life. Although he has also suffered from gout, this other problem worried him more. Writing on March 15, 1753, of a pain in his head, he said, quote, I wish it were in my foot. I think I could hear it. I could bear it better, end quote. So here's, some more, evidence that basically these guys that played with this are now having some issues. One recurrence lasted for the better part of 5 months while he was in London in 1757. He wrote to the doctor about, quote, a giddiness and a swimming in my head, end quote, a humming noise, end quote, and, quote, little faint twinkling lights, end quote, that disturbed his vision. The phase he called, quote, violent cold, end quote, appearing often in his correspondence, was usually accompanied by mention of that same pain that is being dizziness and problems with his eyesight. Franklin, unlike his friend Dalbark, never recognized a connection to electricity. Jean Morin, Moran, professor of physics at the Collège Royal de Chartres, and author in 1748 of the Norvell Dissertation sur Electrical, that is the new dissertation on electricity, end quote, thought that it was never healthy to expose oneself to electricity in any form. And to illustrate his point, he described an experiment conducted not with a friction machine, but with his pet cat. Quote, I stretched out a large cat on the cover of my bed, end quote, he recounted. I rubbed it, and in the darkness I saw sparks fly, end quote. He continued this for more than a half an hour. Quote, 1,000 tiny fires flew here and there, and continually the friction, the sparks grew until they seemed like spears or balls of fire the size of a hazelnut. I brought my eyes near one ball, and I immediately felt a lively and painful stinging in my eyes. There was no shock in the rest of my body, but the pain was followed by a faintness that made me fall to the side. My strength failed me, and I battled, so to speak, against passing out. I fought against my own weaknesses, or I should say weakness, from which I did not recover for several minutes, end quote. Such reaction was by no means confined to scientists, though. What is known to few doctors today was known universally to all, that is, in 18th century electricians, and to the 19th century electrotherapists who follow them, you see. Electricity has side effects, and some individuals were enormously and unaccountably more sensitive to it than others. Quote, there are persons, end quote, wrote Pierre Bartholomew, a physicist from Languedoc in 1780, quote, on whom artificial electricity made the greatest impression. A small shock, a simple spark, even an electric bath, evil as it is, produce profound and lasting effects. I found others in whom strong electrical operations seem not to cause any sensation at all. Between these two extremes are many nuisances that correspond to the diverse individuals of the human species, end quote. So now these are just the writers and ones who are playing with it, so to say. But what about the people which naturally would not write? Many of the people who played with it, the public, we don't know, or maybe we will in this book, but basically we don't know what their correspondence would be also, because simply is most probably could not read or write. Some may have, but where would that writing go to? Would that go to a newspaper, a local newspaper, or would it go somewhere else? You see, that's the other thing, the question you have here to disseminate. Sigard de la Foulon, numerous experiments with the human chain never produced the same results twice. Quote, there are people from whom electricity can be unfortunate and very harmful, end quote, he declared. Quote, this impression being relative to the disposition of the organs of those who experience it and of the sensitivity of or the irritability of their nerves. There are probably not two persons in a chain composed of many who experience strictly the same degree of shock. End quote. Mal Deret, I'm sorry, Mal Deret, a physician, proposed in 1776 that the quote, the face of the Constitution depends in great part on the communication between the brain, the spinal cord, and the different parts by means of the nerves. Those in whom this communication is less than free, or who experiences the nervous illness, are then more affected than others. End quote. So what they're saying here is that basically there's some that basically have maybe no issue at all. Maybe even someone that just did it a few times and played with it were electrical sensitive. They were far more sensitive than other people. Everybody's wired in some ways. What he's saying, I'm gathering, everybody's wired differently. Few other scientists made any attempts to explain the differences. They simply reported them as fact. A fact as ordinary as that some people are fat and some thin, some tall and some short. But a fact that one had to take into account if one were going to offer electricity as a treatment or otherwise expose people to it. Even Abbot Nolet, popularized of the human chain and electricity's leading missionary, so to speak, reported this variability in the human condition from the very beginning of his campaign. Quote, pregnant women, especially, and delicate persons, end quote. He wrote in 1746, quote, should not be exposed to it, end quote. And later, quote, not all persons are equally appropriate to the experiments of electricity, be it for citing that virtue, be it for receiving it, be it finally for feeling its effects, end quote. British physician, that is William Sturchley, in 1749 was already so familiar with the side effects of electricity that he observed after an earthquake at London on March 8th of that year that some felt, quote, pains in their joints, rheumatism, sickness, headache, pain in their back, hysteria, and nervous disorders, especially as upon electrification, and to some it has proved fatal, end quote. He concluded that electrical phenomena must play an important role in earthquakes. And Humboldt was so amazed by the extraordinary human variability that he wrote in 1797, so this is later part of the century, quote, it is observed that susceptibility to electrical irritation and electrical conductivity differs as much from one individual to another as the phenomena of living matter different from those of dead material, end quote. The term electrical sensitivity, end quote, is in use again today, reveals a truth but conceals a reality. The truth is that not everyone feels or conducts electricity to the same degree. In fact, if most people were aware of how vast the spectrum of sensitivity really is, they would have reason to be as astonished as Humboldt was, as I still am. But the hidden reality is that however great the apparent differences between us, electricity is still part and parcel of ourselves, as necessary to life as air and water. It is absurd to imagine that electricity doesn't affect someone because he or she is not aware of it, as to pretend that blood doesn't circulate in our veins when we are not thirsty. Today, people who are electrically sensitive complain about power lines, computers, and cell phones. The amount of electrical energy being deposited into our bodies, incidentally, from all this technology is far greater than the amount that was deposited deliberately by the machines available in to electricians, that is, during the 18th and early 19th centuries. The average cell, for example, deposits about 0.1 jolt of energy into your brain every second. Now, what is jolt? I don't know what that means. Joule. It means, I don't know if that just makes you, jump up or something. I don't know. But anyway, he says that happens every second. For a 1 hour phone call, that is 360 jolts. Compare that to the maximum of only a 0.1 jolt from the complete discharge of a 1 pint Leyden jar. So what he's saying here, and I think he's putting together, I'm just adding some ad lib here. those who had never been exposed to electricity were actually far worse in some ways, and those who were not. I mean, in other words, I'm trying to put this, understand what he's saying here, is that um, the reality is that simply is that we've gotten used to this. That is like for me, for myself, I was born in 1960. Okay, do I have this issue? You know, do I have electrical sensitivity? As far as I know, no. But people who were on the verge of what I call certain time frames, um, you know, they had been part of the, say, the 1860s say they were born in 1845 or such and such, and they didn't come into the birth period such and such until, let's just say, 1860, that basically the telegraph wires are put up. Okay, so they live for, let's say, 15 years without it, and suddenly they're exposed to it. Especially, what about a telegraph operator who was exposed to it all the time in these little buildings they were involved in? And what about the quote unquote the lineman, so to speak, getting up there all the time? You know, making sure the wires are in the right place, such and such. Would he be exposed more since he's right there on the wire, messing with it, or putting it together, or splicing it? So the amount of electrical energy being deposited in our bodies, incidentally, from all this technology is far greater than the amount that was deposited deliberately by the machines available to electricians during the 18th and early 19th century. The average cell phone, again, is like I said, 0.1 such. I've got all such. Got it. Even the 30 element electric pile, which Volta, VOLTA, the one who invented the Verity, attached to his ear canal, could not have delivered more than 150 jolts in an hour, even if all the energy were absorbed by his body. Consider also the static charge of thousands of volts that is accumulates on the surface of a computer screen. Both old desktop computers and new wireless laptops, whenever they are in use, and that part of this charge is deposited on the surface of your body when you sit in front of one. This is probably less charged than what's provided by an electrical bath, but no one was subjected to an electric bath for 40 hours a week. In other words, someone who works behind a desk every day for 8 hours, multiplied by 5. Electrotherapy is indeed anachronism. In the 21st century. We all engage in it, whether we like it or not, even if the occasional use was once beneficial to some. Perpetual bombardment is not likely to be so. And modern researchers trying to determine the biological effects of electricity are a bit like fish trying to determine the impact of water. Then, their 18th century predecessors, before the world was inundated, were in as much better position to record its effects. So let's speculate here. Let's go a little bit longer here. This is my speculation. Okay. So I was talking to someone across me a couple of weeks ago, and we were talking about what we call going out into the nature and basically laying down on the ground. And my question simply is, are we actually getting that energy that was before 1850s? In other words, the harmonic, the frequency here on this planet was different than it is today because there's so many wires in the ground. And we'll go into this book. I've read this book already before, and it goes into more and more technology, which we do with shortwave radio. Most people are not aware of this, but shortwave radio and AM radio are immensely, people who worked in these particular studios and everything. When I went to an AM radio station here locally where I live, I remember seeing chicken wire inside the studio. It was there to protect you from the transmitter, apparently, that was in the building. And I don't know much of what it was, but it was there was two frequencies. That is, it was an AM radio station, that is AM frequency, and an FM. So there were two different types of transmitters, so to speak. One would be FM, well, I guess would stand for modulation. I don't know what it meant. I don't know what F means. So I'm sorry. A is simply I don't know neither, but that would be modulation as far as I remember. But I remember simply being in there with a DJ talking such and such, and we were there. I was in there for probably 45 minutes to an hour, such and such. I don't know if I ever even asked him about the chicken wire, so to speak. I'm sure they got things now differently. This is back in the late 70s. In the 21st century, all are engaged in whether we like it or not. Okay, so we've gone there. So my point simply is that even people who lay on the ground, they're not getting the unless they live out in the middle of nowhere. And this also affects, I'm thinking to myself, that it must affect the ley lines. I have a friend named Phil Langdon who lives in England, and he's spoke to me about ley lines. We've talked about it. He spoke simply, it's all the ley lines that are in basically all churches are on ley lines in England. And I don't doubt him. I've assumed that because simply they built buildings a long time ago. Now, they knew the ley lines were there. So that was positive energy. Now, my speculation question here is does that benefit people now than it did long ago? You see. The second phenomenon pointed out by Humbug has equally profound implications for both modern technology and modern machines, or modern medicine, I should say. Not only were some people more sensitive to its effects than others, but individuals differed extremely in their ability to conduct electricity and in their tendency to accumulate a charge on the surface of their body. I can remember being picked on as a little boy, that someone would come up to you, and they knew this already. Maybe I was just not well aware. They would just rub their certain soles, and it had to be what I would call rubber sole shoes as well as electric. I don't think it worked with leather. Don't hold. I might be wrong about that. And come touch me and shock me. I thought that was really funny, and it wasn't funny when you felt the charge. But that's the way little kids are. They get a kick out of that little stuff, So some people could not help gathering charge wherever they went, simply by moving and breathing. They were walking spark generators, like the Swiss woman whom the Scottish writer Patrick Brydon heard about in his travels. Her sparks and shocks, he wrote, were, quote, strongest in a clear day, or during the passage of thunderclouds when the air is known to be replete with that fluid, end quote. Something was physiologically different about such individuals. And conversely, human non-conductors were found, people who conduct electricity so poorly, even when their hands were well moist, that is, that their presence in a human chain interrupted the flow of the current. So in other words, when they got a circle, it didn't pass through them. It didn't go to the next person next to them. Humbug performed many experiments of this type with a so-called, quote, prepared frogs, end quote. When the person at one end of a chain of 8 people grasped a wire connected to the sciatic nerve of a frog, while the person at the other end grasped a wire connected to his thigh muscle. The completing of the circuit made the muscle convulse, but not if there was a human non-conductor anywhere in the chain. So Humbug himself interrupted the chain one day when he was running a fever and was temporarily a non-conductor. He also could not elicit the flash of light in his eyes with the current on that day. So apparently him being a little bit ill that day had an effect upon his own body being conductive. In the Transaction of the American Philosophical Society from 1786 is a report along the same lines by Henry Flagg, F-L-A-G-G, about experiments that took place at Rio Essequibo, which is now Guyana, in which a many-person chain grasped the 2 ends of an electric eel. So this is an eel. This is an animal. This is a fish. If someone was present who constitutionally was not apt to receive the impression of the electric fluid, end quote, who wrote Flagg, quote, that person did not receive the shock at the moment of contact with the fish, end quote. Flagg mentioned one such woman who, like Humbug, had a mild fever at the time of the experiment. This led some 18th century scientists to postulate that both electrical sensitivity and electrical conductivity were indicators of one's overall state of health. Berth Holton observed this, observed that at Leyden's bottle drew feeble sparks more slowly from a patient who was running a fever than a identical bottle did for a healthy person. So that has effect because your body is run down apparently with a fever, and obviously it doesn't affect you as much as it would be if you were healthy. During episodes of the chills, the opposite was true. The patient didn't seem to be superconductor, and the sparks drawn from him or her were stronger than normal. According to Benjamin Martin, that is, a person who has, quote unquote, a person who has the smallpox cannot be electrified by any means whatever, end quote. But despite the above observations, neither electrical sensitivity nor electrical conductivity were reliable indicators of either good health or bad. Most often, they seem to be the random attributes. Muskenbrock, gentleman we talked to earlier in first chapter, for example, in his Cours de Physique, mentioned 3 individuals whom he was never at any time able to electrify at all. One was a vigorous, healthy 50-year-old man. The second, a healthy, pretty 40-year-old mother of 2. And the third, a 23-year-old paralyzed man. Age and sex seemed to be factors. Bertha Holland thought that electricity had a greater effect on mature young men than on infants or the elderly. French surgeon Antonio Louis agreed. Quote, a man of 25 years old, end quote, he wrote, quote, is electrified more easily than a child or a old person. So the vigor apparently in his age is compared to being one end of the spectrum being young and the other end being older. End quote. According to Sarriel, quote, women generally are electrolyzed more easily and in a better manner than men. But in one or the other sex, a fiery and superfluous temperaments better than others, and youth better than old people. End quote. According to Maureen, quote, adults and persons with a more robust temperament, more hot-blooded, more fiery, are also more susceptible to the movement of the substance, end quote. So it has to do with your personality or when you're born. Is that what he's saying? Saying fiery, that deals with certain, that would be 3 months out of the year. There would be what we call the sign of the fire. Not fire, but what would be fire symbol of one of the 4 elements. You have water, you have earth, you have air, and you have fire. So I'm wondering if that's what he's talking about. That's what it sounds like, hot-blooded, more fiery. These early observations that vigorous young adults are in some way more susceptible to electricity than others may seem surprising, but we will see later the importance of this observation to the public health problems of the modern era, including especially the problem of influenza, which means simply the flu. And I've already looked at some of this stuff already. The flu, and Dr. Bill McGraw has talked about this. This is kind of key. It has a lot to do with the sun also. To illustrate in some detail the typical reaction of electrical sensitivity, people I have chosen Benjamin Wilson's report on the experience of his servant, that is, who volunteered to be electrified in 1748 when he was 25 years of age. Wilson, being electrically sensitive himself, was naturally more attentive to these effects than some of his colleagues. Present-day electrically sensitive people will recognize most of the effects, including the after effects that last for days. Quote, after the first and second experiments, end quote, wrote Wilson, quote, he complained of his spirits being depressed and of being a little sick. Upon making the 4th experiment, he became very warm, and the veins of his hands and his face swelled to a great degree. The pulse beat more than ordinary quick, and he complained of a violent oppression at his heart, as he called it, which continued along with the other symptoms nearly 4 hours. Upon uncovering his breast, it appeared to be much inflamed. He said that his head ached violently, and that he felt a particular pricking pain in his eyes and in his heart, and a pain in all his joints. When the veins began to swell, he complained of a sensation which he compared to that arising from strangling or a stock tying too tight about the neck. In other words, if you've got it, I guess he's talking about a tie, that's what I'm guessing of. 6 hours after the making of the experiment, most of these complaints left him. The pain in his joints continued till the next day, at which time he complained of weakness, and was very apprehensive of catching cold. On the third day, he was quite recovered. The shocks he received were trifling, end quote, by Wilson added, quote, compared with those which are commonly received by most persons when they join hands to complete the circuit or amusement, end quote. Maureen, who stopped subjecting himself to electricity before 1748, also highlighted its ill effects in some details. Quote, persons who are electrified on resin cakes, C-A-K-E-S, or on wool cushions often become like asthmatic, he observed. He reported the case of a young man of 30 who, after being electrified, suffered from a fever for 36 hours and a headache for 8 days. He denounced medical electricity, concluding from his own experiments on people with rheumatism and gout that, quote, all left suffering much more than before, end quote. Quote, electricity brings with it symptoms into which it is not prudent to expose oneself, end quote, he said. Quote, because it is not always easy to repair the damage, end quote. He especially disapproved of the medical use of the Leyden jar, telling the story of a man with eczema on his hand who received a shock from a small jar containing only 2 ounces of water, was rewarded with a pain in his hand that endured more than a month. Quote, he was not so eager after that, end quote, said Maureen, quote, to be the whipping boy for the electrical phenomenon, end quote. Whether electricity did more good than harm was not a trivial issue for people who lived at that time. Maureen, who was electrically sensitive, and Nollet, N-O-L-L-E-T, who was not, came to loggerheads over the future of our world. There at the dawn of the electrical era, their debate played out very publicly, that is, in the books and magazines all the time. Electricity was, first and foremost, known to be a property of living things and not to be necessary for life. Maureen thought of electricity as a kind of atmosphere, a exhalation that surrounded material bodies, including living bodies, and communicated itself to others by proximity. He was frightened by Nollet's notion that electricity might instead be a substance that flowed in a direction from one place to another, that could not flow out unless more of it flowed in from somewhere else, a substance that humanity had now captured and could send anywhere in the world at will. The debate began in 1748, just 2 years after the invention of the Leyden jar. None of this is talked about, folks. No one even talks about this stuff. Okay, we're all the way in 2017, and this guy writes this. It's kind of, how did we get to this place? You see, quote, it would be easy, end quote, prophesied Nollet with amazing accuracy, quote, to make a great number of bodies feel the effects of electricity at the same time, without moving them, without inconveniencing them, even if they are at very considerable distance, because we know that this virtue is transmitted with enormous ease to a distance by chains or by other contiguous bodies, some metal pipes, some iron wires stretched far away, 1,000 other means even easier than ordinary industry could invent, would not fail to put these effects without reach of the whole world, and to extend the use of it as far as one would wish, end quote. Maureen was shocked. What would become of the bystanders, he immediately thought. Quote, the living bodies, the spectators, would quickly lose that spirit of life, that principle of light and of fire that emanates them, to put the whole universe, or at least a sphere of the immense size and play, in action, in movement for a simple crackling of a little electrical spark, or for the formation of a luminous halo 5 to 6 inches long at the end of an iron bar. That would be truly to create a great commotion for no good reason. To make the electrical material penetrate in the interior of the densest metals, and then to make it radiate out with no obvious cause, that is perhaps to speak of good things, but the whole world will not agree, end quote. Nollet responded with sarcasm, quote, truly I don't know if the whole universe must feel thus the experiments that I make in a small corner of the world. How would this flowing material that I cause to come towards my globe from nearby, how would it flow be felt in China, for example? But that would be a great consequences. Hey, what would become, as Mr. Maureen remarks so well, of the living bodies of the spectators, end quote. Like other prophets who had shouted warnings instead of praise for the new technologies, Maureen was not the most popular scientist of his time. I have even seen him condemned by one modern historian as a, quote, pompous critic, end quote, a, quote, gladiator, end quote, who rose, quote, rose against, end quote, the electrical visionary. Know that. But the difference between the two men were in their theories and conclusions, not their facts. The side effects of electricity were known to everyone and continued to be so until the dawn of the 20th century. George Beard and Alfonso Rockwell, authoritarian 1881 textbook on medical and surgical electricity, devoted 10 pages to these phenomena. The terms they used were, quote, electrical susceptibility, end quote, referring to those who were easily injured by electricity, and, quote, electrosusceptibility, end quote, referring to those who sense electricity to an extraordinary degree. 130 years after Maureen's first warning, these physicians said, quote, there are individuals whom electricity always injures. The only difference in the effect on them between a mild and a severe application being that the former injures less than the latter. There are patients upon whom all electrotherapeutic skill and experience are wasted. Their temperaments are not in rapport with electricity. It matters not what may be the special disease or symptoms of disease from which they suffer, that is paralytic or neurology, allergy or neuroasthenia or hysteria or affections of special organs. The immediate and the permanent effects of galvanization or vardization, general or localized, are evil and only evil, end quote. The symptoms to watch out for were the same as in the previous century, that is to do with headaches and a backache and irritability and insomnia. Those are pretty major things, folks. That's what's happening right now around us. There's a four major. There's more than four here. Let me just say this: we have most people today. When I go to the chiropractor, well, most people have big time problems with backs. I mean, this is a big time phenomenon. Headaches, but also people are irritable. They're irritable. Their temperament doesn't like it, and a lot of people now, don't, quote unquote, can't sleep, which is called insomnia. General malaise, which simply means don't have any energy. The excitation or increase of pain over excitation of the pulse, chills as though the patient were catching a cold, soreness, stiffness, and dull aching, profuse perspiration, numbness, muscle spasms, light or sound sensitivity, metallic taste, and ringing in the ears. Electrosusceptibility runs in families, said Beard and Rockwell, and they made the same observations about gender and age that earlier electricians had made. Women on average were a little more susceptible to electricity than men, and active adults between 20 and 50 bored electricity more poorly than at other ages. Interesting. Like Homburg, they were also astonished by the people who were insensitive to the electrical energy. Quote, it should be added, end quote, they said, that, quote, some persons are indifferent to electricity. They can bear almost any strength of either current very frequently and for long applications without experiencing any effect, either good or evil. Electricity may be poured over them in limitless measures. They may be saturated with it, and they may come out from the applications not a whit better or worse, end quote. They were frustrated that there was no way to predict whether a person was in rapport with electricity or not. Quote, some women, end quote, they observed, quote, even those who are especially delicate can bear enormous doses of electricity, while some men who are very hardy can bear none at all, end quote. Obviously, electricity is not, as so many modern doctors would have it, those who recognize that it affects our health at all. An ordinary kind of stressor, and it is a mistake to assume that one vulnerability to it is an indicator of one's state of health. Again, Beard and Rockwell did not give any estimates of the numbers of people not in rapport with electricity, but in 1892, Augusta Morel reported that 12% of healthy subjects had a low threshold for all, at least the auditorial effects of electricity. In other words, 12% of the population was, and presumably still is, able in some ways to hear unusual low levels of electric current. Next section is called weather sensitivity. Unlike electrical sensitivity per se, the study of human sensitivity to the weather has a venerable history going back 5,000 years in Mesopotamia and possibly as long as in China and in Egypt. In his treatise on airs, AIRS, waters, and places, written about 400 BC, Hippocrates said that the human condition is largely determined by the climate of the place where one lives and its variations. This is a discipline that, however much ignored and underfunded, is mainstream. And yet the name of this science, biometricology, end quote, hides an open secret. Some 30% of any population, no matter their ethnic origin, are weather sensitive, and therefore, according to some textbooks in the field, electrical sensitive. The International Society for Biometricology was founded in 1956 by Dutch geographer Solco, S-O-L-C-O, Tromp, T-R-O-M-P, with headquarters in Leiden, the city that launched the electrical age over 2 centuries before. Interesting. And for the next 40 years, until cell phone companies began to put pressure on researchers to repudiate entire long-established scientific discipline. Bioelectricity and biomagnetism were the subject of intensity research and were the focus of one of the Society's 10 permanent study groups. In 1972, an international symposium was held in the Netherlands on the, quote, biological effects of natural electric, magnetic, and electromagnetic fields, end quote. In 1985, the fall issue of the International Journey of Biometrology was devoted entirely to papers on the effects of air ions and atmospheric electricity. Quote, we do great injustice to the electrosensitive patients, end quote, wrote Felix Gad Solman. Quote, when we treat them as psychiatric patients. So what he's saying simply is that there have been, quote unquote, these people have been put in the wrong category. Solman was a medical doctor at Hassag University Medical Center in Jerusalem and chair of the medical school of biopharmacology unit. In 1980, he published a 400-page monograph titled The Effects of Air Ionization, Electric Fields, Atmosphericities, and Other Electric Phenomena on Man and Animal. Solman, together with 15 colleagues in other medical and technical fields, had studied 935 weather-sensitive patients over a period of 15 years. One of their riveting findings was that 18% of those individuals or patients could predict weather changes 12 to 48 hours before they happen. This might be to do with what I'm guessing this. I don't know yet. I haven't seen anything, but it might be to do with barometric pressure. So one of their most rivaling things was that 80% of those, okay, so 80% of these people could read this. In other words, 8 out of 10 could actually, is that right, 80%? I guess that's what I'm thinking. No, it's, well, 80% of 935 would be 94 be 188. So take out 188 off here. You're basically looking at over roughly about 720 people out of the 935 weather-sensitive patients. Okay, we were at, let's see, the quote, the prophetic patients were all sensitive to electrical changes that is preceding the arrival of weather change, end quote. Solman wrote, quote, they reach by serotonin release into ions and atmospheric which naturally rise with the speed of electricity before the slow pace of the weather winds, end quote. Weather sensitivity has emerged from within the walls of centuries of imprecise medical hearsay, I should say, and was being exposed to the light of rigorous laboratory analysis. But this put the field of biometeorology on a collision course with an emerging technological dynamo. Or if a third of the Earth's population are that sensitive to the gentle flows of ions and the subtle electromagnetic whims of the atmosphere, what must the incessant rivers of ions from our computer screens and determinate storms of emissions from our cell phones, our radio towers, and power lines be doing to us all? Our society is refusing to make the connection. In fact, at the 19th International Congress on Biometricology, held in September 2008 in Tokyo, Hans Richter, Richner, professor of physics at the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, stood up and actually told his colleagues that because cell phones are not dangerous and their electromagnetic fields are so much stronger than those from the atmosphere, therefore decades of research were wrong, and biometeorologists should not study human interactions with electrical fields anymore. In other words, since we are all using cell phones, therefore we have to presume that they are safe. And so all the effects on people, plants, and animals from mere atmospheric fields that have been reported in hundreds of laboratories could not have happened. It is no wonder that longtime biometeorologist researcher Michael Persinger, spelled Persinger, professor at this is a university, Laurentian University in Ontario, says that the scientific method has been abandoned. That's Laurentin University in Ontario. That would be in Canada. But in the 18th century, electricians didn't make the connection. The reaction of their patients to the friction machine shed new light on an ancient mystery. The problem was framed by Mauduyt, Marduk, I don't know, quote, men and animals, quote, he explained, experience a sort of weakness and languor on stormy days. This depression reaches the highest degree at the moment preceding the storm. It diminishes shortly after the storm has burst, and especially when a certain quantity of rain has fallen. It dissipates and terminates with it. This fact is well known. Important has occupied positions for a long time without there being able to find a sufficient explanation, end quote. The answer said Ben Bergholten, B-E-R-T, Holden, was now at hand, quote, atmospheric electricity and artificial electricity depend on one and the same fluid that precedes various effects relative to the animal economy. A person who is insulated and electrolyzed by the bath represents one who stands on the earth when it is electrified to assess. Both are filled to overabundance with the electric fluid. It is accumulated around them in the same fashion, end quote. The electric current, or circuit, I should say, created by a machine was a microcosm of the grand circuit created by the heavens and the earth. Italian physicist, that is Jim, I'm going to spell it to you, I don't understand it, I can't pronounce Italian. Giambat Battista Beccaria described the global electrical circuit in surprising modern terms, as you can see in chapter 9, which we're actually right now in chapter 3. Quote, previous to rain, end quote, he wrote. Quote, a quantity of electrical matter escapes out of the earth, in some places where there was a redundance of it, and ascends to the highest regions of the air. The clouds that bring rain diffuse themselves from over those parts of the earth which abound with the electric fire, those parts which are exhausted of it, and by letting fall their rain, quote, restores the equilibrium between them, end quote. 18th century scientists were not the first to discover this. The Chinese model, formulated in the Yellow Emperor's Classic of Internal Medicine, written in the 4th century BC, is similar. In fact, if one understands that Q is electricity, and that yin and yang are negative and positive, the language is almost identical. The pure yang forms the heaven, and determinate yin forms the earth. The QI of the earth ascends turns into clouds, while the QI of the heavens descends and turns into rain. End quote. Famous weather-sensitive and therefore electrical sensitive individuals have included Lord Bryant, Christopher Columbus, Dante, Charles Darwin, Benjamin Franklin, Goethe, I should say, Victor Hugo, Leonardo da Vinci, Martin Luther, Michelangelo, Mozart, Napoleon, Rousseau, and Voltaire. And so that's the conclusion of chapter 3 tonight. So thank you for being here. And that roughly was about 50 minutes here, so a little bit longer than I expected. Yeah, I have some correspondence here with people. Let's see, Mike Metcher. A few short years ago, when I started to pay attention to space weather and the sun's activity, if there was a C-class flare, it was a big deal. Now we have a high C-class baseline. Interesting, Mike. Didn't know that. He also states, Mike Melcher says, meaning we are always been exposed to a higher level of energy. The baseline is almost M-class, just as there is talk about Mpox or coronavirus, the other layer of the sun in the corona. Yeah, jolt is a measurement energy. Well, I kind of figured that, Mike. So, but yeah, I didn't know how much of an energy it is, so to speak. Thank you for the wisdom here. Also, he's talked about, I am listening while I'm doing other things, but after I comment about Mpox, I thought I heard something about smallpox. I need to listen again. I'm now more convinced everything is connected. That is in the universe. Yes, very much so. Has to be. He also makes a statement, roughly about a few minutes ago, 829. Pretty sure vibration and frequency is energy. For sure, it's connected. What happens when these cells we are made of vibrate differently? This is freaking me out. Lots of laughs. Well, I'm actually part of this thing I'm doing, Mike, is I have a equipment here at my house. It's a company called Spooky 2. Spooky is a name. It's something that Einstein saw something that basically affected him. And so he called it spooky. And then the 2 is simply is that it's basically that he said it was spooky, and so the company is called Spooky 2, meaning this is a second parameter. In other words, it means second thing. So, so how does this work? Well, there are two science per se. There are 2 perspectives, and this is somewhat before Einstein, or during his time frame. One was Raymond Rife, R-I-F-E, who experimented with what I call frequencies. I assume it basically with his laboratory back in the 1900s. It's roughly almost 100 years ago. And what he was able to do with microscope, he built his own microscopes, 4 of them actually, and he was able to see the blood and see the pathogens in it. And he was able to use a frequency in order to, quote unquote, to destroy that pathogen without, quote unquote, destroying other things around it. So what he was speculating, and what we could say simply, each pathogen has a certain frequency. Now, recently, I heard from another guy I just talked to briefly only a couple of weeks ago, spoke about simply is that someone is what they call a kill cycle. This is what basically Raymond Rife was about. He was interested in killing what we call pathogens in the body that are actually what we call like leeches that rob you of your energy. So he was able to see these things at that point and would eliminate those. But the key was simply is the program calling detoxing your body with this would be like 5 days long for the body, and your body's at that point is extremely gone through a lot of detoxing. So you would give your body 2 days off, and then you would come back with the same program on the 8th day. So after 5 days of detoxing and 2 days of basically, lounging around and just trying to get your act together, the 8th day, you'll come back in the same frequency. And what he said simply was that the pathogens, after going through all this, changed their frequency. Now, I don't know how true that is, Mike. I'm just speculating what he's telling me. So that's the kill, the way of what we call Raymond Rife was to do, of killing these pathogens inside of you. Now, we have what we call good bacteria and bad bacteria, so to speak, also within us. Now, that was Raymond Rife's perspective. Tesla had a completely different perspective. One is what we call, Raymond Rife with what we call a kill protocol. And then Tesla had what we call beefing up the cell. In other words, you basically are trying to heal the cells within your body, to get them back to what I call the peak performance. And when they're peak performance, it means simply is that they no longer are susceptible to this pathogens. In other words, the technology that Tesla uses, which is still based upon frequency, okay, and so, but it's based upon what he called it scalar. He called it scalar technology. So it's different than what Raymond Rife was working with. Now, Raymond Rife was able to cure cancer with in Los Angeles in the 1930s. 14 out of 16 for a certain period of time, and I don't remember what the time frame is. And 14 out of 16 is not bad, okay, so that's not bad. But then he was given an extended time in what he was doing, and he cured 2 out of 16 within a month or two later. So basically, he cured all 16 of those cancer deals, is what I understand. That got him in a lot of trouble, big time trouble. And the AMA would not go along with that, because that means simply it's about money. Back to we're talking about Tesla. Is like a scalar technology. It's based upon like a bubble type of deal. You use what we call a transmitter and a receiver. So you have a transmitter and a receiver, and you have what I call the and I'm guessing this is the pattern. And actually, Maxwell, Scottish guy, was able to, he's the one to come up with it. He called it scalar waves. That's what he called it. He called it scalar waves. This is in the early 1800s. So roughly 100 years later, then we have Tesla, who's coming out using, because Tesla is studying these scalar waves. And just go a little bit further. We remember that Tesla played with what we call remote control. So he obviously knew there were certain waves that could be used as conductivity with these remote deal that actually could move that boat in the water. You see, that was a way of him experimenting, knowing simply there were scalar waves, and that actually could be maybe manipulated or used in a way to do whatever certain directions that you could use the boat, remote control boats. That he invented that, so to speak. He showed that, as I recollect. So the scalar wave is like an aura. It's an aura that basically is between you, the receiver, and the transmitter. And this company in China is making these, and it's all technology from Tesla. In fact, they make two different types of equipment. One is to do with what we call a scalar system, with using two, like I said, one transmitter, one receiver, similar to radio waves, if we would call that. In other words, for example, when you transmit radio waves on a certain frequency, like say 970 AM, you have to tune your receiver at 970 also, in order to pick up the reception of that broadcast. So that's how that frequency works, so to speak. Well, that's the same thing with this technology here, because you have a transmitter and you have a receiver. And in between there is the scalar wave. Although scalar waves can continue for longer periods, it can go further than that. In other words, it doesn't simply just stop at the receiver. So, well, this is another guy I've been listening to, Dr. Bill I think he's down in Panama. He uses these scalar equipment, look like little suitcases. If you ever study any shortwave transceivers a long time ago, or not transceivers, but shortwave radios, there was such a thing made by a company. I'm trying to think of the company in the 1940s that had what they call it all wave antenna. It was a certain type of antenna, but it was actually enclosed in a metal deal along with the radio. So when you turn that direction to that, apparently to that quote unquote station where it's located or where its beams are being shot out, it will receive that station. I think it's a company called, American company called, I'm trying to think of the name. They're no longer, trying to think of the company. I think it was part of Zenith. In fact, I'm pretty sure it was part of Zenith Radios. Zenith, a long time ago. Interesting name, Zenith. But this guy's been able to help people in, not Guatemala, but in Panama and in Costa Rica with their illnesses with these scalar machines. So, and then the other one is simply is that's called the central or center, or whatever it's called, is dealing with the kill cycle. It's a completely different way. So there are two different pieces of equipment using two varieties of ways of actually helping human beings with certain types of diseases. One is based upon a heal modality, and another one is based upon what we call a kill modality. Now, also with this particular scalar deal, it's amazing, a little bit more of this, is to do with what we call, you can put something on a, what they call a plate there. There's two plates on these pieces of equipment. So one plate is on the transmitter, and the other transmitter, not transmitter, but the receiver also has a plate. You can put something there that could be what we call molecular. In other words, it pulls the molecules from that container, glass container. Let's say, for example, the essential oils. Let's just say that. And that essential oil can pass back to the transmitter. And that would cover both sides. In other words, one would be transmitting to the receiver. The receiver would be sending out somehow, I don't understand that completely, but it would pick up on that plate and would send that back to the transmitter, which would be you being in the middle of it. So that's what this is, I'm sharing with this because I actually have this equipment and I'm already playing with it already myself. So now, yes, I'm curious, would plagues concern us? Yes, it does. Yes, it does. The solar activity affects human life on this planet. So what I mean by that, he is Dr. Bill McGraw. You have to go to his BitChute channel. His BitChute channel is simply called The Cure for Chronic Disease. He's not on YouTube. He cannot be on YouTube, so to speak. Okay. So he has gone back and looked at the patterns where this active solar activity. Guess what? With the more activity, people catch what they call the flu, and they die because they're the weak ones, so to speak, and they're susceptible to that disease, that solar eclipse, or not solar eclipse, but activity that affects the Earth magnetism, and that affects the life on this planet. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but that's kind of just giving you an answer to what you're talking about here. But yes. Solar activity has enormous impact upon life on this planet. And it seems to happen, I don't know if it's based upon, again, what we call a receiver and a transmitter. You could see that, meaning that the Earth is a receiver and the sun is being a transmitter, so to speak. But I also think simply it's energy based upon the Earth or whatever, the magnetic energy, whatever you want to call it. I'm not an electrician. I don't understand all that. but I'm just speculating what he says. Dr. Bill McGraw, he shows it in one of his videos. He shows the proof that basically people get sick. And these plagues, and I don't know if it's plagues, I wouldn't call it that, but he would simply say people get sick and they die. And it's not, I don't know if it's predictable, but it is predictable once a solar activity amps up. And this book here is showing also, when I'm reading here, a guy, author Firstenberg, is talking about simply is that, yes, certain times, he doesn't talk about it a lot of times, but simply is they're playing with electricity here. And what he's speculating simply is that there was never any electricity on this planet used in this way to the mid 1700s or early 1700s when he started playing around with it. And basically, they were playing with something that they didn't really know what they were playing with. And he claims now, this is based upon not only he says this, but also Dr. Bill his name, I always forget his name, last name, McGrath, or whatever his name is. He is saying simply is that this happens, and he has the figures to showing that people died at certain frequent times. Okay, and so this is kind of just speculating here. It's kind of interesting. Yeah, some people are. That's what this other part of the book is simply is that people are super sensitive to these things. Like he talks about storms coming. What's the thing I'm talking about? I have it on my phone because I'm susceptible to sinus headaches. It's a barometric pressure. The barometric pressure has a deal on my iPhone, and basically it tells me days that are going to be the barometric pressure is going to be bad, and I can feel the effects of it. Usually, it affects me more in the wintertime than it does in the summertime. You see, so this is you're saying simply just validating much of what I have been feeling and learning. A couple of weeks ago, my ears felt pressure, and it was coincided with X flares. Yeah, you probably are electrically sensitive, very sensitive. He also speculates, Dr. Bill McGraw says one other thing. And it's basically that those who have not experienced this electricity or whatever at first are the weakest, is what I understand. So they're susceptible to flus, influenza. So this is why people get sick. So, and this is how people get sick, so to speak. That is. Now, I see a speculation in my own thinking. Is the reason why those people get sick is because their immune system is weak, meaning simply they're susceptible to anybody that comes along with a germ, so to speak. But I'm not a big believer in germ theory neither. I don't believe that that's true neither. I think that's just a cover. That's my opinion. You may disagree. So I don't, I'm just trying to, share something here that I felt that needs to be shared with others. That's what I was doing tonight, which I've already done a couple chapters already today earlier. And I find it an interesting book. Like I said, I read it last year. And I never bought the book. I actually am able to read it off of, right now I'm reading it off of archive.org. That's just all I'm doing is just reading this book off the archive. So I don't want to pay, 35, 40 bucks for a book, you see. So he talks, and we could, sometimes, what about, I can speculate here. This is a speculation question. I don't have any answer. What about the bubonic plague? It'd be interesting that we could find that also information, what took place. We know what maybe the time period, but what was occurring with the solar cycle? What would that be, with the solar activity that takes place that affects this planet? That's just a speculation, but that's, quote unquote, millions and millions of people died. Excuse me. So I'm not a fan of what do we call it? Back in the French times, Pasteur. I don't believe in his theory. Simply is that he would say that simply is that you get sick because of germs. I disagree with that. All of us have germs. I don't care who you are. It's the only ones that basically I see is the ones who are weakest, meaning their immune system is not up par. In other words, they're susceptible to quote unquote getting sick from someone else touching something when their immune system is weakest. You know, everybody touches certain things, and see, that's what I'm saying. Simply, no, it doesn't make sense because you can touch a water fountain, you know, da 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 da. Guess what? Um, guess what? You know, many people touch their hands, whatever, and put their mouth on it, whatever you want to talk. Back in the days when I'm 64 years old, so and you know, none of us, it never, as far as I know, it never bothered us. Who knows? Da, 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 da. But if you believe that Pasteur says this, it's crazy because that makes everybody susceptible to germs. My thing is simply it's your immune system basically. It's your body is at a weak point in your life, and you touch something such and such, you get that. In other words, you're responsible for your health, is what I'm saying. In other words, you need to take care of yourself. So that's what I'm trying to explain. And so I would disagree. I'm trying to think of the other French guy, who wrote articles against that. He did not agree with that. Oh, Beecham. I guess it's, I don't know, Beauchamp. I think of Chomp. Disagreed with Pasteur. So I would agree with him because I don't think that you basically get sick from germs. All of us, basically, all of us would be dead if it's all germs. Seriously, if you touch something, a baby or whatever, it dies. You know, a baby comes out of its mother's womb in no time, such and such, and you know, da da da. And long ago, there were not what I call hospitals, so to speak, stainless steel, you know, equipment. Guess what? They were born in barns, whatever. Now there was higher death rate then? Probably so. But they were also in hay, whatever else, manure, whatever, such and such nearby, whatever. And some made it and some didn't. You know, that's a unless you have statistics for that, I'm just speculating, so to speak. So, well, Mike, I'm going to have to get ready to go here. It's getting close to about 9 o'clock. But it was good to hear from you. I thank you for some of your things. But yeah, I'm playing with this particular equipment right now, made by a manufacturer called Spooky 2. And it's based upon, it's this SPOOKY 2, not letter, but the number 2. And you can look into that, see what you think about it. I'm not a salesman for them. I'm not that, but I am also knowing this simply is that at being 64 years old, I'm trying to live my best part of my life, so to speak, and not be susceptible to being tired and weak all the time, so to speak. And I think that's the main thing is trying to keep yourself as healthy as possible. And one other thing to say, Mike, is that basically people today eat a lot of junk food, and it's not good. I don't care what you eat. You know, a lot of the junk food today is just simply junk. That's all it is. And you know, I was fortunate to have a mother who knew how to cook, and she's no longer here. But the point simply is, she definitely knew how to cook. And but you know, there are other people, and I don't get into argument with the whole idea of, you know, you should eat fruits and vegetables, meat's bad, and all that stuff. I don't care about that. That's not important to me. So thank you, Mike, for being here. Metcher. Again, you might want to catch on the other couple of 2 chapters. I plan to continue to read the book in its fullity, probably within the next couple of weeks, and share this because I feel like it's a very important book. In the later chapters, he does speculate, because I read it before, he does say that the telegraph wires had an effect upon people because they were actually put on close proximity over people's houses, like in London, England, when they started writing it. They were basically feet away from the root, went across such and such. Now that doesn't occur as much now. That was telegraph, okay? They would put all these, you go back and look at old pictures, you see all these wires all over the place in these cities. They're all over the place, okay? Now, the question would be, if someone had a study, verify the study, say, what was life like in those cities depending upon if you lived out in the country also. So the comparison between what we call this people who live in the city, do they have a longer life, and those that didn't have power at all. But then you can't really say that that's a quote unquote a equal experiment, because basically people who lived out in the rural areas tend to work a lot harder than those who lived in the cities, so to speak. So, all right, Mike, thank you for your comments. It was appreciated very much. Thank you. I think we're kind of in the same camp here, so to speak, and I see what you're talking about. Again, what happened to the whole thing with the bubonic plague? They claim that some kind of rat did this, or a mouse, and like, I don't know about that. That's stretching it. So, anyway, thanks, Mike. Have a good evening. We'll talk to you soon again. Okay, thank you. Take care. And that is the conclusion for our broadcast tonight. Again, The Invisible Rainbow, Electricity and Life. This was chapter 3 by author Arthur Firstenberg. That's Firstenberg. If you want to buy it, I know you can buy it from Amazon. And it was a paperback book. I think it was 2020. So this is a recent book, basically only 4 years ago. Actually, it was published in 2017, but was taken also, a paperback edition was published in either, I think it was in Vermont or New Hampshire, one of the small publishing houses, and published that book. So, all right. Talk to you later. Take care. Have a good evening.